Captains of Industry is brought to you by the new BMW X5.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Captains of Industry. My name is Gugulethu Mfuphi. Well, today in the hot seat we have Marc Wainer, the Chief Executive of Redefine Properties. Marc, thank you so much for joining us. Now, when you talk to people in the business sphere, they know you as this property guru. You've been in the industry for almost 40 years. But I want to get to know you, the person. And just before we started this interview, you commented on your African name, which is Ditsebe, which means big ears. Where did you get that name and how did it come about?
When I was growing up, our maids in the house used to call me Ditsebe, and it kind of stuck for many, many years. I haven't thought about it for many years, but when we spoke earlier, yeah, it came up.
I can imagine, but walk us through your childhood. I think that's one thing that many people don't realize, is that you're a Joburg boy.
I'm born and bred in Johannesburg. We lived in Sydenham East, very middle class sort of suburb. My parents had a little grocery and fishery business in Yeoville, Johannesburg. So I spent a lot of time. It was I have one brother, and it was expected of us when my parents came home at about 6:30, we'd have a quick supper. Then we'd all go to the shop and unpack and mark the groceries. Sure. In those days, things weren't pre-packed, so we'd weigh milli meal and flour and rice in packets and make sure the right size packet was used, you know, for the right quantity. And then as I got older, maybe when I was 8 or 9, I was allowed to go and work behind the shop sorting out the cold drink bottles. And there was a big bane of contention because my brother, who's 2 years older, was allowed to serve in the shop. There was no self-service in those days, so if somebody wanted a can of peas, you took it off the shelf. And I think that's where I learned about small margins and watching the pennies, because it was the kind of business where your margin was measured by the size of the paper bag or the size of the piece of paper that you used to wrap a loaf of bread.
But walk us through that, because quite clearly that did shape your view of
No, absolutely.
business.
So, you know, that was my parents' business. They were in it for about 27 or 28 years. I hated the business, but I was almost forced into it because of my father's ill health. When I left school and I had to do my 9 months army, I became a sales rep. Then my father had heart attacks and I had to go into the business. Ultimately, that business was sold, and I was looking for a job where I didn't have to go and ask somebody if I wanted to take my tea from 11 to 12 instead of 10 to 11 or whatever it was. And I found a job for a shopping centre manager in what was then South Africa's first shopping centre, Kempton City. And I got the job, surprisingly enough. And I was there for about 9 months. And they were very happy with what I'd done, because I didn't know. All I did was apply my grocery training. So I said, oh, well, we're not recovering enough water. Charge everybody R4 a month for water, which was illegal, but I didn't know that. So, and those kind of things. Then they moved me through to head office. And then South Africa went through bad times economically, and the company was closed down by the banks that they owed money to. And together with 3 of the other guys that worked there, we went to the banks and said, can we start a company to look after the properties for you, property management, which we did. And the bank backed us, and that's how I started in property.
I want us to go back to your first job, that shopping centre management at Kempton City. How big was your first pay packet?
700 Rand a month.
Sure.
Okay,
that's a full tank in most cars these days.
Yes, not even. So yeah, 700 Rand a month, and I was living in Randburg. I was married with 1 child. Initially I didn't have a car, because we had 1 car. So I used to have to wake up at about 6:30 and hitchhike from Randburg to Kempton Park, and eventually I bought a second-hand car so I could go up and down. And then when I was promoted to head office, they gave me an increase of 50 Rand a month, which I was quite upset about, but I thought I should have got 100. But nevertheless,
inflationary pressures,
yeah, didn't last too long. And one of the people that I started with there, one of my partners, we were together for 15 or 16 years. We never had an argument. He's been in Australia now for 26 years, and I still speak to him twice a month, 3 times a month, and we still have a connection. So he was a very meticulous guy, so he would leave the office and there was not a single paper on his desk.
Does that differ from your working style, perhaps?
Very much. I cleaned my desk up for you this morning.
Okay.
So I've always got this cluttered desk, and one day we had moved into new premises and he came into my office and said, you know, the state of your desk reflects the state of your mind. So I said, so what are you trying to tell me? You've got an empty mind. And that was the only words we ever had. So we had a fantastic relationship, and I think that's what business is all about, as well as family life. It's all about relationships.
I want us to go and explore this property management company that you started. No doubt you had to get permits, you had to go apply for some kind of funding from the banks. For entrepreneurs back then, it couldn't have been easy in the South African
environment. You know, we were so
environment.
naive. We started this business, we had no capital between the four of us. We managed to scrape together enough to register the company. And when we negotiated with the bank, as they said they'd give us the contract, we asked them to lend us 10,000 Rand working capital.
Sure.
So we managed to get that. And then we ran that business for a year. But we knew that the bank was not a long-term holder of property, and ultimately they would sell the properties. So we worked hard to try and grow our business and get other clients. And eventually we bought another business, which turned out to be riddled with fraud. But we were so naive, we didn't even know what to look for in the due diligence. But that was a great learning experience. It was really a baptism of fire. We came through it, and that's when I also learned, because when we went to the bank, it was at the same time that the estate agents board came in, said you had to have trust accounts, we needed an overdraft. Our balance sheet was a zero, and our bank manager at the time took us to head office because we'd been turned down, and the bank basically backed the people as opposed to the business. And we had a fantastic relationship with that particular bank until we sold that business, and the two of us went into another business which was more development and sectional title conversions in Hillbrow and Berea and places like that, in the days when it was still popular.
Not known for what it is now.
Not for what it is now.
But walk us through the boom of Redefine. When did that happen?
Redefine listed in 2001, okay, February 2001. It had a market capitalization of 450 million Rand, about 900 million Rands of assets, which were partly property and partly shares in other listed companies. Property was a bad word at the time. None of the institutions wanted property, but we managed to get it away. It was the first of its kind, having some property and some listed shares. And that was our base. We then used our stakes in the listed companies to take them over and build the company. So it started quite slowly, but there were a lot of sellers in the market and there weren't that many buyers, so we were able to build the asset base by acquisitions. And we sit now, call it 14 years later, with a market cap of about 30 billion. So it's been quite an exciting ride, and we've built a nice business, made mistakes along the way, and we did a lot of things the right way.
Well, there are a lot of successes according to the recent transactions that we've seen within the business. But Marc, you've seen the booms and the busts in the property period, and many people don't really understand what drives that. For a property novice, what are the key intricacies that lead to a property boom or property bust? Well,
there are really two things. The single most important one is the interest rate cycle. So the lower interest rates are, the better it is for property, and the better it is for property shares, because we're seen as a type of bond. So if the rate on government bonds go up, our prices fall. If they drop, our prices go up. So we're an alternative just based on the yield that it produces. So, I mean, we had a stage when just before we listed Redefine in 1998, interest rates were 25%. And that gave us the idea of buying some listed securities, because we thought if interest rates go down from 25 to 21 or 20, we'd make some money. We never envisaged that they would get to single digits. So, you know, that was for the last 5 years, just before the last increase, we've had very, very low interest rates, and that's why South African property stocks have done so well. The other problem is, of course, the boom and bust supply and demand scenario. So when times are good, everybody and his brother starts building. properties, be it residential or otherwise, and you get to an oversupply. But after the 98, 99 crash, the banks became much more circumspect in terms of giving money to developers and people. They used to just give them 60 or 70% or 80%, whether they had tenants or not. Now the banks want to see pre-lets. They want the building 60 or 65 pre-let. They want equity in. So it's become much more difficult. And I think even now, although there's subdued demand, particularly for offices, a lot of these so-called planned developments are not going to happen.
When you look at the environment right now, we're also seeing a lot of consolidation. Redefine's recently purchased a newer T group. You're also looking at buying out Maponya Mall, based in Soweto. And there's also a lot of activity regarding Delta, Rebosis, as well as Ascension Properties. Are we heading in that direction where consolidation
Yes, look,
will
I
be
think
the
in
theme?
boom times there's the opportunity for a lot of smaller funds. And if you actually look at them and say, where did most of their properties come from? They came from the bigger funds. These were properties that no longer suited our profile or growth points or the bigger funds because they were too small. So these funds listed. It was quite easy to assemble portfolios and get going, but they don't have a big shareholding base because they're small. So their stock is illiquid. They can't raise money easily from their shareholders. And their ratings are, because they're illiquid, are not really good enough. And now we have higher interest rates. It's very hard for them to grow. So the only way they can really make a meaningful fund is for 2 or 3 of those funds to merge, or for them to be absorbed by bigger funds. And that's what we're going to see this year.
So Property Education 101 there, indeed. Welcome back to this week's edition of Captains of Industry, where we speak to Marc Wainer, the Chief Executive of Redefine Properties. Marc, just before the ad break, we touched on Property Education 101, and it does seem as though the private sector is seeing more consolidation, which could be better for the smaller property groups. But when it comes to working with government, you've been very outspoken about the missed opportunities there, the lack of regulation. Is it really such a tough environment in the South African sphere?
Look, government for us, and we have about a 3 billion rand government portfolio, my focus is on getting rid of it. I was actually quite upset in the budget speech where Pravin lashed out at landlords for treating government badly, and I think he's painting everybody with the same brush. What we do know is that that department has been riddled with corruption. People have come to us to buy a building for 100 million rand, let's say, and they get a 10-year lease and it's worth 160 or 180 million overnight. And we, because we only have 15 or 20% BEE points, can only get a 2-year lease or a 3-year lease. So they've opened themselves up wide open for corruption. To me, what should be is, are we paying a market-related rental? Will the landlord fix the building? And we can only do that with a 5-year lease. And that's in terms of government leases. But generally, my biggest gripe is with local authorities trying to get planning permission. This whole question of rates, I mean, this year the property industry has seen about 22% increase in our rates bill, which we pass on to tenants in the main. And that, of course, makes it much more difficult for us to get real rent increases. So we're now seeing in a new building, if we're building a new building in Sandton, the rates component of the gross rental is between 16 and 18%. It's an unsustainable model. So the local authority should be giving us some kind of a rates holiday, encouraging development, because the more new buildings that go up, the more we grow the infrastructure in terms of development, the bigger the rates base is for them, and the less they have to charge everybody. So it's if you're selling cigarettes, if you can sell 100 packets a day instead of 10, you've got a better business, and that's what they should be looking at, but they don't.
You've quite clearly reached a level of frustration with regard to this matter. Are there proposed solutions, though?
You know, we have SAPOA and we have industries, and we talk to the various local authorities and the mayors, and they promise things will change, but it doesn't. And one of my big concerns, property is a long-term business. So if I try and think about Johannesburg or Cape Town or Durban 10 or 15 years from now, given urbanization, all people coming into the cities, what's happening to the infrastructure? You know, if we take the population of Johannesburg doubling in 20 years or thereabouts, what are we going to do to house these people? Where's the sewerage? Where's the roads? Where's the infrastructure? Where's the forward planning? Okay, and we're not doing that. We're not looking at it.
Does that forward planning perhaps curb investment from property companies like yourself?
Absolutely. I think if you look at the main property players, all of us have now gone offshore. Some to Africa, us to Australia, Growth Point Australia, the UK, because the opportunities are better, okay, and it works. Now, that money should be invested, if there was the opportunity and less frustration, that money would be invested in South Africa. We'd be creating jobs. And we'd be doing all these kind of things, but we can't. You work in Sandton, and we were talking earlier about how congested it's going to be, how much more development can happen in what's now the financial hub of South Africa, and it is so choked from a traffic point of view, we can't even get the local authority to consider one-way roads to create a ring system. And this is what they should be doing. This is the financial hub. This is the face of the financial hub of South Africa to overseas investors and visitors, and they're sitting in traffic for hours.
Exactly.
And the traffic lights don't work.
Exactly. To the pressures.
Yeah.
Quite clearly. But if you could speak to the finance minister perhaps today, what would be the top of the agenda with him?
Housing. I'd say to him, if you look at what's happened in the UK since they've done this the subsidised buying thing, Australia's economy works off housing. Let's find, and I'm not in the residential market at all, but if we could find a way to have a subsidized interest rate, 5 or 6% for people who want to buy houses, build houses, I think we could create masses of employment, and we would have a much more robust economy, because people who buy houses, buy furniture, buy TV sets, fridges, and all the things that go with it, and we have a huge housing backlog. So, let's focus on putting a proper roof over these people's heads, and secondly, that would grow the economy enormously. But and delivery. Delivery
is key. Marc, just listening to you, it's one can tell that you've got years and years of experience in the property industry. You're well in your 60s now. What keeps you motivated to wake up every day and come into the office?
2 things. The one is I love what I do. I actually don't consider it work when I come to the office. My wife sometimes teases me and says, why don't I take out the table and put in a bed? Because I think about this business the whole time. The second thing is, between my wife and I, we have 5 children and 10 grandchildren. So if you start paying their school fees and holidays and all the other things, I can't afford to retire. But it's great.
Quite clearly not anytime soon. But your mission and your goal, and perhaps the legacy that you hope to leave behind at Redefine one day when you decide to step down, what do you hope that legacy will be?
I think I want to have created a company which is a brand, which is recognized as being fair as the landlord and tenant principle. I want it to be a place of choice, first place in this industry where people want to work, and that's already starting to happen. And that's what I'd like to do, and a few iconic buildings that people say Wainer built that building or conceived it, so those kind of things. But importantly, a company which has made a difference in the lives of most South Africans. And we do that through our CSI responsibility, whether it's playgrounds in parks or at the zoo, or building classrooms and these kind of things. So I think that in 4 or 5 years' time, if that's when it's going to be, I'd like to look back and say, yes, I made a difference.
And you're quite the family man. You mentioned your 5 kids as well as 10 grandchildren.
It's the best. That's the best thing I've ever created. I mean, so yeah, they're special. All my children, they've taken second place now. So they used to be my princesses and special, but my grandchildren are just very, very special to me. Very bright. I've got the cleverest grandchildren in the whole of South Africa.
All grandparents say that.
All grandparents, but mine are really. And they're absolutely amazing. I love spending time with them. I love being with them. We do holidays together. So next month I'm going to be away. In December I was away with my family. Now we're going to go and do a little cruise and take my wife's kids on a holiday to Europe, and it's when I really get time to get to know them and spend time with them, as opposed to an hour or 2 hours, and it's wonderful. So, you know, they're the future of South Africa, and they're irreplaceable. So that's for me my biggest success, my biggest wealth is in my family, and I love them to bits.
That strikes me so much, because growing up, your parents played an influential role in the individual that you became today, and no doubt you'll also have an influence on your grandchildren and your children.
Yeah.
The impact that you hope or rather the leadership skills that you hope your grandchildren will learn from you.
What I try and teach them is that it doesn't matter what you're going to be. Just try and be the best at whatever you do. So if you're going to be a waiter, that's fine. Be the best waiter. And whatever you do, just try and be the best. Do it to the best of your ability, and you will be successful.
Looking at your desk, you mentioned earlier that you cleaned it up for us today, Marc. So quite clearly, it's not representing what's happening in your mind, or is it?
No.
Never an empty mind.
No, it's never an empty mind. And I think one of the things I learned, not right in the beginning, it took me a long time, it's more important to recognize what you're not good at than what you're good at. So I'm no good at detail. Okay, I'm good at conceiving and doing. The implementation side I'm not so good at. So I learned a long time ago that you need people to complement your skills. And I'm very, very fortunate that in Redefine we have people who are good. So my FD, my COO, all of my people, my ExCo are really good people, and they implement and they do the things I'm weak at. And even in my personal life, my wife, fortunately, is a very detailed person, very detailed, so she pays the bills, she does everything. Otherwise, nobody would get paid.
Sure. She matched your shirt and tie, I'm sure?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So she's very good at that, and I'm fortunate. So in my personal life and in my business life, I've really got good people surrounding me, and that makes life so much easier.
One key area, Marc, that we haven't touched on yet is the role of education. You yourself haven't mentioned going through any kind of formal education, but your children have, if we look at the pictures around us in the room. Is that important as well, regarding the people that you
Today it
you?
is. Look, I have no formal education. I have a matric, but times were different, okay? And I learned at the University of Life, if you want to put it that way. But today education is very, very important, and the quality of education. We have a graduate program here. We have 20 people this year, graduates that we take through. I'm not knocking it, but I think at the end of the day, if 3 or 4 of them become permanent employees, we'll be lucky. The skill in maths in particular and numbers is very weak. So I think it's very important that people do get an education. It doesn't have to be a university education. Okay, I just think that the people who come out of matric need to have different skills than what we're teaching them. I think we need to teach life skills. Not everybody's going to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, but a lot of those people are going to be in business. And as part of our curriculum, we should be teaching them about business. You know, this world has changed so fast, technology-wise. I can't keep up with it. I battle to answer a telephone call.
Are you on Twitter?
No, I wouldn't know how to do
Facebook?
Twitter, Facebook, no. I can answer the telephone, I can make a call, I can now do SMSs and email, and that's about it. But I watch my kids and my grandkids. I mean, 3, 4 years old, they know exactly what to do with iPads and all these kind of things. And it's a different life. The world has become very small, but it's an opportunity. Because for the first time, somebody who's starting a business on the internet can compete. A person operating out of their bedroom at home can compete with a massive multinational, because you as the buyer don't know what's behind the person. You'll see XYZ product and you'll buy it on the internet. So it's a level playing field, but we need people to understand what makes the consumer tick, what they need to do, service levels, pricing, all these kind of things to run businesses. I got so excited the other day. I was driving and I heard a story in one of these squatter camps that with all the rains there was a river and people couldn't cross to the shops or the taxis. And an 11-year-old kid built a bridge. 11-year-old built a wooden bridge across this river or stream, and he was charging R2 per person to cross it. People were phoning in and saying, oh, he's making money out of people's, and I thought, this is fantastic. Let's try and find this kid and give him a bursary, because these are the kind of people we need in South Africa. People who are thinking out the box, they're entrepreneurs. And really, I called my wife and I called my HR lady. I said, listen to the story. Isn't this fantastic? Now, how many people are there in South Africa like that? A few thousand, okay, of those people growing up, starting a business, having that kind of vision would make such a difference, and they're there. We just have to find them.
We just have to find them. While you're off looking for that 11-year-old, hopefully we do find him. Indeed. But Marc, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you and getting your insights. Thank you so much for your time again today.
Thank you.
That was Marc Wainer, the Chief Executive of Redefine Holdings. Well, that does bring this week's episode to an end, but do join us again next time where we speak to another captain of industry.